I recently made a video saying that out of all of the sequencers that I've personally tested, my personal favorite and what I see as the king of sequencers is currently the Hapax sequencer. But then Squarp, in the meantime, have gone and released the XP32, which severely challenges that notion. Well, I just so happen to have an XP32 and a Hermod Plus right here. So that's what we're going to discuss in today's video. And of course, I already own a Hapax, so we can see if the king has already been dethroned 1 month since I made my original video. So stay tuned and I'll give you my honest opinion on all three units. But first things first, on my previous video that I was talking about sequencers, probably the most frequent comment I got was a request to compare the Hapax to the Oxy 1 sequencer. Now, I managed to get in contact with Oxy and they agreed to send me out a demo unit so I can make that video. But they said they'd have to wait for their demo unit to be returned first before they could send that out to me. And it seems a bit odd that they've only got one single demo unit that just gets sent back and forth. I'm kind of envisioning a half-broken unit which is sticky and covered in Cheeto dust. But that was their answer anyway, so I have to wait to make that video if I'm going to make that. I don't know if I'm that interested. However, what's important to mention is that for this video, I did reach out to Squarp and I requested that they send me the XP32. And unlike Oxy, they immediately sent me out brand new demo units that I could test out and make this video with. Now, these demo units are on loan. They didn't just give them to me for free. I either have to buy them or return them after making this video. So stick around to the end of the video to see if I'm going to sell my current sequencer and get these instead, or whether I'm going to stick with what I've got already. But it's important to note that Squarp have literally zero input over my video content. In fact, I'm not even going to send them the link to this video until I've published the video and it goes live. So they have zero say in it, and I will speak my mind and say exactly what I think. If I think that they're crap, I'm allowed to say that they're crap, and I will tell you that my personal opinion is unfiltered every time, whether I pay full retail or I get lent demo units, it doesn't matter to me. If something's good, I'll say it's good. If something's bad, I'll say it's bad. Now, if you didn't already hear about the XP32 in the last couple of weeks after they released it, either you're just not in the Eurorack world or you don't understand what all the fuss is about. So let's briefly compare the Hermod Plus to the Hapax and see what the differences are. If you just look at the specs, you'll see that one's a 16-track sequencer, the other's a 16-track sequencer, and they pretty much do the same kind of thing because they're both sequencers made by the same company and they've got similar operating systems and do similar things. But that isn't the whole story. The Hermod has 8 CV outputs and 8 gate outputs. That's the first 8 tracks. And then the second group of 8 tracks is MIDI, which is sent out of the mini jack MIDI output. So the Hapax only has 4 CV outputs and 4 gate outputs. So it's way less Eurorack connectivity than the Hermod Plus. And also the Hermod Plus has 4 CV inputs, whereas the Hapax only has 2 CV inputs. So the Hapax literally only has half the amount of Eurorack connectivity as the Hermod Plus out of the box. But when you add the expander module, now it's got 48 outputs, which is absolutely bonkers compared to just 8 outputs on the Hapax. And the crazy thing is when you buy both of these together, it's still cheaper than just buying one Hapax sequencer. So it seems like the king has been dethroned. This is the new kid on the block now. Why would you buy the more expensive Hapax? It doesn't make that much sense when you can get more I/O for less money. It literally costs less, and it seems crazy, right? But maybe that's not the whole story. First off, unlike the Hermod Plus, the Hapax isn't designed to be predominantly a Eurorack sequencer. It's supposed to be a full-featured desktop MIDI sequencer, so it's got 4 ports for MIDI out, 2 ports for MIDI in, and then you've got the USB host and device. And in addition to that, then you've got a bunch of Eurorack jacks on the back as well. But predominantly, if anyone's going to be using the Hapax as a Eurorack sequencer like I do, then you just buy a MIDI to CV converter, and now you've got as many channels as you want pretty much. So not only do you have all of the MIDI channels that you could possibly ever use, you're never going to exhaust that when making music, it's also not even a 16-track sequencer, it's a 32-track sequencer in disguise, because you just press like one button and then you get onto the next page of the 16 tracks available. They're described as 2 separate projects, but really it's not really 2 separate projects in the workflow. It's literally just pressing like one button, and then you've got the additional 16 tracks there, and you can go backwards and forwards super easy. There's no hunting in menus and menu diving and all this weird workaround stuff. No, it's not a workaround at all. It's just like literally you've got like 32 tracks there that you can use. For years now, I've already had buckets of outputs coming out of my sequencer and going into my Eurorack setup, because I had a polyend poly 2 module with an ALM busy circuits module and an expansion module for that. So I had quite a lot of I/O already in terms of sequencer outputs. And I was using that for ages with the Pyramid sequencer before I got the Hapax more recently. And even 20 years ago, you could have used a Yamaha sequencer or an Akai MPC sequencer and sent the MIDI channels to a bunch of MIDI to CV converters. So there's nothing really that new or revolutionary about having a bunch of outputs from your sequencer that you can use in Eurorack. But what is actually quite revolutionary about what the XP32 allows you to do is you can take any of those 32 outputs and do anything with it. Whereas my setup, if I've got a trigger output, well, I can't put CV signals out of that trigger output. All I can do is send a note to it and it will send a trigger pulse out of it, and that's it. You can't do anything else with that. But with the XP32, you can have any output doing anything. So I can do a clock output, a trigger output, a gate output, a CV output for pitch, or a CV output for some sort of modulation thing, send an envelope out of it. I can do anything I want with any of those outputs, whereas in my setup, I'm kind of limited to doing what it says on the module, and there's a weird sort of like mapping that I have to do, and MIDI learn and all this sort of stuff, and it's a bit more difficult to set up. Whereas if you've got the Hermod Plus with the XP32, it's got a really intuitive, like built-in workflow of how you set everything up, which you can do really quickly and intuitively on the fly, and anything could be anything that you want anywhere, and I really like that. So that is pretty new and revolutionary, even if the concept of having a bunch of outputs isn't so new. Now, what I was experimenting with, and I don't think a lot of people were going to buy it just for this because it's a bit over the top, but I was using the Hermod Plus and the XP32 as a kind of glorified standalone MIDI to CV converter kit. And so I was just using the Hapax and I was sending via USB all of the channels, all like 16 channels to the Hermod, and it was just handling it perfectly. And I could send I did it where all of the lights were lighting up on all of the channels of everything, and it was just handling it. And so I was really impressed with that. And so if you, for some application, I don't know why you needed 56 channels of outputs out of your sequencer, then that combination would work. But that's quite a luxurious setup. But saying that, if you looked at the Cirklon sequencer with its Eurorack expansion module, you only get 24 outputs from that setup, but that costs you $3,000. So it's actually cheaper to buy a Hapax and the XP32 and a Hermod Plus than it is just to buy the Cirklon and the Eurorack expansion module. And you got like more than double the amount of outputs from it. Now, of course, you could buy the Cirklon and then buy additional other MIDI expansion modules, MIDI CV expansion modules. But now you're looking at like $3,500, $4,000 for something that you're achieving from Squarp for just a bit over $2,000. A valid question might be, well, why do you need so many sequencer outputs anyway? Most Eurorack sequencers don't have that many channels. The Rene, the Metropolis, they've all got like just a couple of channels, and even the Eloquencer has only got 8 channels. So why would you need 48 channels? It sounds a bit much. Are you actually going to use those channels? Well, in my case, I do use quite a lot of channels, because the way that I have my system set up, I like to have a lot of oscillators and sound sources going into a 24 channel audio interface, so I can have a lot of oscillators and a lot of stuff happening. And I don't really have that many CV generation modules. So I generate all my CV in the sequencer, so all of that needs to be output into all of those modules to do all of the modulation that I need to do. And so I'm really controlling my whole Eurorack setup from my sequencer. And for people who say, oh, that sounds really expensive, Well, no, it's not. It's actually cheaper because you don't have to buy all of the individual CV generation modules. So let's say you have like an LFO, and then you have, I don't know, an ADSR generator, and you have this, and you have a random chance generator, and you have all of these. You have like 20, 30 individual modules versus you just have the sequencer and it does it all. It's way cheaper just to have a sequencer. So that's why I'm really interested. The sequencer is like the heart of my setup. That's why I'm so enthusiastic about sequencers. I love sequencers. And so I need a lot of outputs to actually get into my modular gear. And so, of course, you need a lot of output. You just have 8 outputs. You're not going to really be doing that much with that. You need at least, 24 minimum to really drive your setup if that is your approach. One of the main criticisms I saw in comments after the XP32 was released is that it's too expensive. It costs more than the Hermod Plus. How can you have an expander module which is more expensive than the module? Now, of course, price is a valid concern, and at first look, for an expansion module, it is pretty pricey. However, if you think about what it is, it's 32 digital to analog converters. Now, you can buy a stereo digital to analog converter for over $1,000, but that's mostly just overinflated marketing hype nonsense. The actual converters that you use, let's say the ones that Squarp used, let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say it's 50 quid for a bank of 8. And now you need 4 of those 8 banks, and now we have 32 channels. Well, 4 times 50 quid, that's 200 quid just in the chips. Now you've got to add the faceplate, the LEDs, the machining, the manufacturing, the ribbon cable at the back, the box that it goes in, and all that. So I do think these units cost a bit of money to manufacture. So I don't think there's a huge amount of markup there. They've got to make some profit, but I don't think it's outrageous. So I think the price, okay, it's an expensive module, but you're sort of getting what you pay for. Like, you've got 32 DTAs in there. It's quite a lot. But despite that, maybe the competition can do it cheaper. So let's have a look at some of the competition. So we're over at Modular Grid, and here's the Hermod with the XP32. And I've got some competition which I thought was relevant. So in the same amount of HP, we've got the NerdSeq with the expansion module, and you've got loads of outputs here, not as many as with the XP32, but you've got loads of outputs nonetheless. But the thing is with the NerdSeq, if you really like trackers, this is a really cool option, but it's only got 6 tracks in total. So unless I'm missing something, all of these outputs and everything is squished onto only 6 tracks. Here we've got the Eloquencer, which I've actually owned, and I love this sequencer. It's really great. However, it's only got 8 tracks, and all of the information is the same stored in the sequencer. It's the same for these 8 tracks as if you get this expansion module. There's no more new information that you can store there, as far as I'm aware. The only thing that happens here is instead of outputting CV and gate, you're outputting MIDI data instead. But there's no point in getting this MIDI expander and then getting a MIDI to CV converter to try and get more channels or something, because it's not going to win you anything. You've only got the 8 outputs here, so you're not really going to get any more out of the Eloquencer than you've already got when you just buy it stock. The only reason for that, as I say, is just if you want to sequence something which is MIDI based instead of CV. And then we've got the vector sequencer here, and it also has an expander module which has a whole bunch of outputs, which is really cool, but it's also not got that many tracks. So you're going to have to control all of that, squish in just to a few tracks. So I'm sure I haven't seen everything, and someone in the comments is going to turn up and say this module does it or whatever. But from what I have personally seen, there just basically isn't anything in the Eurorack market in a Eurorack form as a module which actually even comes close to what the Hermod Plus does, let alone Hermod plus the XP32. Nothing comes even close. And so what about in the desktop form? And we can get a few expander modules, maybe we can get something cheaper in that sort of setup. But let's say you've got a desktop sequencer, maybe you've got an Oxy One or you've got an Akai MPC, and you want to add some Eurorack outputs, or you want to expand that to have more. Well, there's many MIDI to CV converters on the market. Here's the Derpfer one. You've got the Mutant Brain one, which is pretty cool. And then you've got ones that you can plug straight into your computer via USB. And so you've got the shuttle control, and you've got the expert sleepers one here. But the thing is, you're going to have to buy like multiple modules of these to get the same kind of count as you're going to get with the Hermod and XP32. So you'd need something like 3 of most of these. But in the case of the expert sleepers one, you'd need like 5. And I'm not really sure what the workflow is going to be like, having 5 USB devices and you don't know what one's which. I don't know if you can label them properly or if you can actually have multiple ones of it and it work properly anyway. I don't really know how that's going to work. I wouldn't want to do that myself. But even if I did do that, the cost of getting 5 of these or 3 of these other ones is actually more, significantly more than getting the XP32, or in some cases getting both modules, the Hermod and the XP32. It's cheaper to get those than it is to get 5 of these, for example. So shout out to Squarp for lending me these modules. It was really fun reviewing this. As you know, I'm not a review channel. I don't just review everything that manufacturers want to send me to advertise on my channel for paid sponsorships. In fact, I emailed Squarp requesting these modules and they kindly sent them out to me to review. So the reason why this review was fun is because, as I described earlier, the sequencer is the heart of my setup. It's sending out all of the modulation sources and controls everything in my modular system. Now, Squarp has been at the heart of my setup for many years now. I have currently got the Hapax, and before that I had the Pyramid, and before that I had the original Hermod. Now the original Hermod is very similar to the Hermod Plus, which is currently available. The original is now discontinued. It's quite similar, but they have upgraded it in many different ways, and it does feel better than the original one that I owned quite a few years ago, around the time that it first came out. I do think they've made a big upgrade there. The silicon pads feel really nice, and with the XP32, it's just a no-brainer. If you want a sequencer in your rack, there's absolutely nothing which comes, I don't know of anything, regardless of any price, that absolutely comes within the mile of this for 48 outputs for under $1,000 with 16 tracks. Like, what else? The Eloquencer doesn't touch it, the NerdSeq doesn't touch it, nothing touches it, nothing comes close. That said, I'm very happy with my setup. I wanted to try out the Hermod Plus for a while. Now I've had that opportunity, but I'm very happy with my Hapax, with the Polyend, Poly 2, and the ALM Busy Circuits module with the expander. I've got enough outputs coming out of those MIDI to CV conversion modules. But that said, obviously, I want Squarp to release the XP32 for the Hapax, because originally when I first saw it come out, I was like, wow, I'm going to buy that and replace my existing MIDI to CV converters with this XP32. It looks amazing, but then I read into it and it's like, no, it's an expansion module where it only works with the Hermod. I was a tiny bit disappointed. But if I didn't have the Hapax and I wanted to actually have a sequencer in the modular rack setup, then obviously complete no-brainer, Squarp, nothing touches it. But as I have the Hapax, like, I'm sticking with that with my existing system. So I'm going to send these modules back, and I do thank Squarp for sending me, as I say, sent them straight out with DHL Express. It came within less than 24 hours and brand new modules. So other manufacturers, Oxy, should probably take a bit of note of that.